subject matter being considered. And so I'm sure you, like me, have been monitoring our proposal to amend our Sexual Offenses Act 1991 with a view to addressing the issue of, in quote, marital rape. And I'm sure, like me, you have regarded this as a very serious public policy issue, one in which the stakes on many sides are high, and one for which I'm sure the country seeks a resolution. And so today we have gathered together to have a discussion on this matter as a partnership between the Ministry of Social Services and Urban Development and the University of the Bahamas. And I couldn't imagine a better place to do something of this nature and a better partnership to attempt to do something of this nature and a better panel to address something of this nature and a better audience to listen to and participate in the discussion of something of this nature. So you should give yourselves a round of applause. And because I believe the power of God is capable of doing all kinds of things, we're going to ask Bishop Chadwick James to come and to take us before the Lord in prayer so that he could bring his presence and power and grace to bear on our discussion today. What you say? Bishop James? All right.
Minister Shivago and I used to play basketball together when we were children. So I thank God for his humor. Let us look to the Lord in prayer. Father, it's in you that we live and move and have our very being. We thank you, Father God, for this experience. We thank you now that the Bahamas, even the world, seek to understand, to clear up, to clarify, to deal with marital rape. We thank you, Father God, for clarity of mind, spirit. We thank you, O God, that as we stand here knowing that it's all in your hand, we ask you now to speak and minister to every individual present. We ask you now to anoint the voices and the hearts of those who will speak. Anoint the panel. We thank you for this collaboration between these two entities, University of the Bahamas and the Department of Gender. We bless you now, God. Speak to us and descend upon us, O God, that you will get all glory and you'll get all honor for all of our deliberations. We give you praise. It's in Jesus' name we pray. And all of God's people say amen. Amen. Amen.
Here at the University of the Bahamas, we are proud to be able to host events such as this to enable minds to meet, to discuss important issues. And it is for that reason that it is an honor to invite Dr. Maria Oriaki, our Vice President of Academic Affairs, who leads the charge in strengthening the minds of these young people and other people that come in this place. Dr. Oriaki.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lang. Protocol already being established, let me say good evening to everyone, but having a special evening greeting to the wife of our Prime Minister, Mrs. Anne Marie Davis. It is so wonderful to have you in our midst here at the University of the Bahamas. Welcome. It is important that we have this panel discussion on marital rape and the proposed amendment to the Sexual Offenses Act in the Bahamas. I'm honored to be here, and on behalf of the Office of Academic Affairs and the University of the Bahamas, we say thank you all and welcome to this event. As many of you know, the issue of marital rape has long been a contentious and often overlooked issue within our society until fairly recently. Despite the fact that sexual assault within marriage is recognized as a criminal offense in many parts of the world, it remains unaddressed in the Bahamas. However, there have been recent calls for change, and we are fortunate to have gathered here today to discuss the proposed amendment to the Sexual Offenses Act that would address this long-standing issue. This discussion is timely and important, and it is vital that we take the time to engage in thoughtful and respectful dialogue on this issue. We are fortunate to have a diverse range of participants who will share their insights and perspectives on the proposed amendment. As scholars, researchers, and educators, we have a responsibility to provide evidence-based perspective and to help inform public policy discussions. Academic research has shown that marital rape is a widespread and devastating form of sexual violence with long-lasting physical, emotional, and psychological effects on survivors. Studies have shown that the legal reform can play a crucial role in reducing rates of sexual violence and promoting gender equality. Therefore, the academic community has a vital role to play in this discussion. By drawing on our expertise in areas such as gender studies, criminology, law, and public health, we can provide insights into the prevalence and impact of marital rape effectiveness on legal interventions and the potential challenges and opportunities to implementing legal reform. As we begin this conversation, I encourage all of us to approach the issue with an open mind and to engage in respectful and constructive dialogue. Let us use this opportunity to listen to each other and to learn from each other and to work together towards a more just and equitable society. Once again, I'd like to thank our organizing partners from the Ministry of Gender and Family Affairs, as well as all of our panelists for participating in this event. I look forward to hearing the valuable contributions of this important conversation. Thank you and welcome.
Okay, so let me now ask you, please, to welcome to greet us the Honorable Lisa T. Ramming, MP, Minister of State for the Ministry of Social Services and Urban Development.
Good evening. First of all, I would like to recognize the Office of the Spouse of the Prime Minister, Mrs. Anne-Marie Davis. I would also like to recognize the administrators, faculty, staff, students, the University of the Bahamas staff, the Ministry of Social Services staff. I also see staff from Urban Renewal. Thank you so much. Wave your hand. You work hard today, but you're here. God is good. Senior public officers, representatives of civil society, and I see my good neighbor. He's my good neighbor, Mr. Hamilton, next door neighbor. Also representatives of the faith-based organizations, esteemed panelists, and I say esteemed because they're all great, intelligent people. Nicolette Bethel and Mrs. Misheris and I worked in the courts. knows the law very well. And she used to live in Marathon, correct? Good Marathon resident. Let's hear it up for Ms. Mistress. We have Senator Maxine and, of course, Mrs. Paul. I love you. Also, I would like to send greetings to persons who are streaming live. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and of course our moderator, whom I haven't seen for a very long time. I was a young child when I saw you last. That doesn't mean you're getting old. That means that I'm getting older. The media, a pleasant good evening. I am delighted to be here today and to see so many of you from the various aspects of society. This means a lot, not only to me, but to those who will benefit when this act is passed. I'm not going to say should, when, because it will. I commend the organizers for putting on this forum, and I wish to highlight the work of the University of the Bahamas, particularly the Vice President, Dr. Maria Orica, Mr. William Fielding, she's not going to beat me up for that, I'm sorry, and their team, who have met with our team from the Department of Gender and Family Affairs over the past few months to organize this forum for students and members of the general public. We find ourselves as lawmakers making the great big mistake when we decide that we want to pass laws without involving society. And that is why we get a lot of pushback. And I think that this is so important because people embrace it better when they understand. This space provides an opportunity for persons to express their views on the proposed amendments to the Sexual Offences Act, 1991. And in the voice of the speaker, she says, no rowing in this place. We're going to be good. It is so good to see the students, who of course are our future represented here this evening. And of course, I understand earlier today, there was a forum, I saw a few clips on the Sexual Offences Act organized by students themselves. I said, look at our future politicians. I found it very encouraging because there are our future leaders and they're addressing very important topics that even our adults don't want to talk about. I also wish to congratulate all who have participated, including the lecturers and the professors who made today's event a success. And of course, I wish to be empathetic about it. Gender-based violence, it's real. We don't like to talk about it. We like to push it under the rug, but we have to face it. Whether it is perpetrated against a woman or a man, it is an issue that needs to be addressed. The more voices that are heard on this topic will assist in the advancing of this discussion. When we remain silent, that means we agree in accepting that nothing needs to be changed. And I think that that deserves a round of applause from you who are here today. That means you want to see change. And I encourage you to promote more dialogue, even if society don't feel that this is enough here. Again, I am happy to see the student body who saw it fit to start the discussions. Now it's time for the greater adults, those of us who think that we are the masterminds. I look forward to a candid dialogue, and I trust tonight it will be so enlightening because I'm excited about what's going to be discussed tonight because of my involvement, of course, in social services and all the persons that we come in contact with every day, those who are abused on all aspects. Sometimes my heart is hurt because we can only Band-Aid it. But I'm willing and looking forward to seeing the true results from it. And so I want to say to you, sit back, relax, and enjoy this event. Thank you.
So let me give you the path tonight. We're going to hear from our panelists individually, and they have a set period of time in which to make their presentations. And because I know they're so disciplined, I'm not concerned that I'm going to have to crack the whip. Yeah, I don't think so. Otherwise, though, I can crack the whip. That allows us to have enough time for the question and answers that will follow after the presentations. During the question and answer period, I have but one rule, just one rule. If you feel agitated, if you feel passionate, and if you feel compelled to be so opposed to somebody that you might say something off, what you have to do is, before you say it to somebody, you have to put brother or sister in front of it. So if you feel like you want to call somebody stupid, you have to say, brother, you're stupid. Sister, you're stupid. Because according to some research, it is very difficult to retain negativity towards somebody, calling them brother and sister first. So that's the only rule we have.
That's why we use it in the union.
See, there you go. So I'm not asking you not to be agitated. I'm just saying that one rule is required if you're going to address anybody while you're agitated. Other than that, also, during the question and answer period, it's called question and answers, not statement and answers, or statement and questions then answers. So we want you to keep your statements brief and your questions succinct, and that'll help all of us to be able to get fulsome participation tonight. I do want to single out again, single out the efforts of Mr. William Fielding in having gathered us together and made this all happen. Thank you very much, Mr. Fielding. Okay. So to begin us off, we are going to call on our Associate Professor, Social Sciences here at the University of the Bahamas, Dr. Bethel.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am not here necessarily to argue. I'm just going to make some statements. First statement, Bahamians occupy a social landscape in which the question of consent extends beyond our bodies into every area of experience. The majority of Bahamians are descended from people who were brought to this country against their will, where they were deprived of their rights over their bodies, forced to labor for the benefit of others, and given no scope for self-determination. Y'all may have noticed I have a water bottle here. Because we continue to live in a society which historically has not recognized the right of individual Bahamians to self-determination, whether it be enslavement in the past, colonialism also in the past, and today dependence on external forces. We also live in a patriarchal society, which historically has not recognized the right of individual women to self-determination as citizens, as wives. And so we are living with the legacy of the past. And in order for us to have this debate, we cannot forget that. We have inherited a world in which it's fine for some people to be owned or possessed or controlled by other people. We don't question that. And so the discussions about the limits of Bahamian women's right to refuse their legal partners access to their bodies are too often framed in terms of this, right? Of the merging of two discrete individuals into one. And this concept of merging removes the right of one individual to determine the way that they behave. But the question that I want to just ask is, does this merging remove the basic humanity of that person? Or is it a type of legal coercion? Is it a way of asserting the right of one person to own the other? And is that something that happens at the moment of the marital vow? When one says, I do, does that take away your ability to ever say, I don't? Because rape is defined in Bahamian law as having sexual intercourse with another person without their consent, except for if you have consented at one moment at a marital vow. Is that sufficient? Does that take away an individual's humanity, control over themselves? Or is that something that is held over in our society from our past, when it was fine for one human being to own another human being? So, are individuals social beings who have the right to determine the way in which they behave? Does that right go away with one's gender or one's status, marital or not? Or does it continue to inhere in one's humanity? So does the I do at the altar erase an individual's humanity? Does it confer permanent consent to whatever treatment may come after? Should it remove an individual's ability or right to his or her self-determination? I'll leave that with you. Thank you.
Oh, the ship is rolling. It's rolling. So Dr. Bethel was addressing the agency of women and women as property. We now want to call on Reverend Cedric Moss, Senior Pastor, Kingdom Life Church, and he's going to be talking about amending the amendment. Reverend Moss.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lang. First of all, I am grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this important discussion on amending the Sexual Offenses Act. And to manage the few minutes I've been allotted, I want to begin immediately by asking a question which I'd like each person to answer within the quietness of his or her mind. The question is this: do you believe that a husband should be able to have sex with his wife whenever he wants to and however he wants to, even if she does not consent? I'm absolutely certain that there's not a single person present whose answer is yes. Indeed, in my many discussions and conversations on this subject, since it came to the fore of our national conversation in 2009, I have not yet found one person who would answer that question positively. However, even though no right-thinking Bahamian believes that a husband has the right to have sex with his wife whenever he wants and however he wants, the provisions of the Sexual Offenses Act allow him to do just that. He is legally able to have sex with his wife whenever he wants and however he wants, whether she consents or not. So, for example, in the Bahamas, a husband can legally force himself on his wife in vaginal intercourse with or without a condom. He can legally force his wife to perform oral sex on him with or without a condom. Or after she's recently delivered a child. He can legally use so-called sex toys on his wife against her wishes. He can even legally sodomize his wife against her wishes. The only women in the Bahamas who are protected against such forced acts of sexual intercourse are those who are single, and a relatively small number whose marriages are before the courts in divorce or separation proceedings, or under some type of court order. This unacceptable state of affairs begs the question: since there's virtually unanimous opposition against a husband being able to legally force himself on his wife against her wishes, why is it, since 2009, all we have done as a nation is talk about this matter and we have done nothing to legally protect wives from such barbarity. Having over the years thought about this question for a long time, I'd like to propose what I believe the answer is, and it's a two-part answer. First, successive governments, in my view, have unwisely put the cart before the horse by drafting proposed amendments to the Sexual Offences Act before consulting with stakeholders in the general public, rather than consulting with stakeholders in the general public to receive input on how best to achieve the end result that we all agree upon, then setting about to draft the amendments, taking into account the input received. And second, stakeholders with different concerns have been more preoccupied arguing with each other and talking past each other rather than talking with each other and seeking to understand the different concerns with a view to finding a mutually agreed upon approach to achieve their mutually held goal, which is to appropriately criminalize forced sexual intercourse in marriage. I have no doubt that once we correct these two failings on the part of the government and the stakeholders, we will capitalize on our common ground conviction that in the Bahamas, husbands should not be legally able to have sex with their wives whenever they want, however they want, whether their wives consent or not. And we will pass a suitably acceptable amendment to protect wives accordingly. From my perspective as a Christian, as a pastor, the central concern with the proposed amendment and the approach that the government is taking is that it undermines the institution of marriage. As it currently stands, rape in Section 3 of the Sexual Offences Act applies exclusively to unmarried people. And bearing in mind the broad definition of sexual intercourse in Section 4 of the Act, it means that consent to sexual intercourse between two unmarried persons is not absolute. It is subject to withdrawal at a moment's notice and at any stage in any act of sexual intercourse. Therefore, for example, from the moment of sexual contact up to the split second before climax, a woman who initially gave consent to sexual intercourse can withdraw, she may withdraw her consent and tell the man to stop. If he does not, according to Section 3 of the Sexual Offences Act, he commits the offense of rape, even if his act is not reported, and even if he is not convicted if charged with that offense. And it makes absolute sense to have such a law to govern sexual intercourse between two unmarried persons, because unlike married people, unmarried persons have no legal covenant, no legal contract that implies open-ended consent, not that it can not ever be withdrawn, but it is certainly given at the point of marriage. Therefore, they need moment-by-moment specific consent between them. My biggest concern is that the current approach that the government is using proposes to redefine rape to lump unmarried people and married people in the same category, to apply the same rules to govern their conduct towards each other sexually. The 2018 approach, this is the third attempt that we have made at this. This approach is very similar to the 2009 approach, which I did not support. The 2018 approach I did support. That approach did not seek to lump together married people and unmarried people in the same boat. Instead, the 2018 approach simply sought to take the excluded marriages currently and bring them in Section 15 of the Act, where we already have marriages that are before the courts. The current definition of rape is fine for unmarried people, but it is not fine to apply it in the context of healthy marriages. Another issue is the naming of the offense. When forced sexual intercourse takes place in marriage, what should we call it? There are those who insist on calling any and all forms of forced sexual intercourse rape, whether it takes place in or outside of marriage. However, I believe that such an approach is unhelpful and misleading because it departs from the entrenched practice of naming the offense to describe the crime. For example, we have many ways to unlawfully deprive people of their property, like armed robbery, stealing by reason of employment, receiving, burglary, fraud, and the list goes on. Just suppose we had one description for the crime of depriving others of their property, and that word was stealing. You would not be able to tell the armed robber from the shoplifter, or the person who stole by receiving versus the one who stole by reason of employment. Therefore, when the government moves ahead to criminalize provable forced sexual intercourse in marriage, which I believe should be done, I think we should try to establish criteria so that the acts of forced sexual intercourse would be called something like spousal sexual abuse, and in severe cases, battery and sadistic treatment, something like aggravated sexual abuse, spousal sexual abuse. If we take such an approach and we call non-consensual sexual intercourse in marriage something other than rape, we will not be breaking new ground. Other countries have done the same. Additionally, it is my view that it is not helpful to insist that rape is rape because rape is not rape. For example, in the Bahamas, our definition of rape is such that women can commit rape. However, in the United Kingdom, a woman cannot commit rape because, by definition in the United Kingdom, rape must include penile penetration, and women do not have penises. So an act committed by a woman in the Bahamas that would be defined as rape would not be defined as rape in the UK. It would be called sexual assault. So rape is not rape. Rape is what we define it to be. And in the Bahamas, based on the fact that Section 15 of the Sexual Offences Act, which already calls non-consensual sexual intercourse in particular groups of marriages sexual assault by spouse and not rape, it makes good sense to continue with that approach and leave the definition of rape to be solely applicable to non-consensual sexual intercourse between unmarried persons and simply appropriately extend the provision of Section 15 to the Sexual Offences Act to include currently exempted marriages. I'm not sure how I'm doing with time, but I should have looked. I'm over my time, right? Okay, all right. So let me conclude just with this. So quickly, I believe that, one, the government needs to allow the approach to what we're doing to be shaped by consultation and input on the front end. And then I believe that stakeholders need to engage in civil discourse. I believe the definition of rape should not be changed. It should be left to cover unmarried persons. And then I believe that Section 15 should be extended to include those marriages that are currently exempted. Thank you very much.
Oh, the tree is moving, the train is moving. We are now going to hear from retired Deputy Registrar of the Supreme Court, Miss Carol Money. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Carol Munnings. Just make it easy for everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Protocol being established. I adopt the protocol. So, I promised that I would be good. Okay. Right. So, marital rape. Perspectives from a Christian judge and lawyer. My views expressed here are made based upon my background of over 33 years as a lawyer, including 12 plus years as a former magistrate and deputy registrar of the Supreme Court. I am a former prosecutor and have prosecuted myself a range of criminal cases, including sexual offenses in the Supreme Court. I have sat as a magistrate in family court. I am a practicing and professing Christian and have been my entire life. Some persons would argue that the position of the church should not matter when it comes to human rights or for us as Bahamians to take the necessary steps in criminalizing marital rape. And there are sound legal and academic arguments why this position could be taken. But in practical, everyday, and local terms, I think that we can approach the argument about whether or how to criminalize marital rape from the angle that we call ourselves a Christian nation. A Christian website, compellingtruth.org, puts it this way: sex is meant to be a unifying and beautiful event in marriage, not a venue for violence and coercion. Yet, some use passages like 1 Corinthians 7, 1-5, and Ephesians chapter 5 and 22 to claim that the Bible does not recognize marital rape and that wives must always consent to sex. Using these passages in that way is a gross misinterpretation and misuse of the Word of God. Ephesians chapter 5 discusses mutual submission built on a foundation of love and respect. It compares the relationship between husband and wife to that between Christ and the church. Jesus never forces the church to submit to his desires, let alone use violence. Rather, he willingly sacrificed himself to save us and lovingly beckons believers to obedience for our own benefit. Rape is a selfish and violent act. Jesus Christ is neither selfish nor violent, end quote. And so we have sex that is meant to be an expression of the oneness that is in marriage. It makes sense that those passages that I referred to would say that a husband's body belongs to his wife and that a wife's body belongs to her husband. In Old Testament times, polygamy was practiced. But could the admonition and command that a wife's body belongs to her husband and a husband's to his wife be intended perhaps to secure the New Testament relationship of monogamy, which differed from the Old Testament practice of polygamy, so that by ensuring that each understood their right and obligation to the other, the natural sexual desires could be secured and fulfilled, and others were excluded from participation. And this exclusivity is evidenced by the fact that we recognize adultery as a violation of the covenant and a ground for divorce. I would argue that because I belong to you exclusively is not a ground for you to use and abuse me in any way you please, sexually or otherwise. And it is worth noting that in our law, consummation is a key element in marriage. If you go through a ceremony of marriage, but the parties never have sex with each other, the marriage can be annulled. Therefore, the question of sex being a constituent element in marriage does not even arise. But let's remember, rape is a criminal act of pure violence that happens to involve the use or misuse of sexual organs, either penetration by or of a sexual organ, or even purported sexual organ, as we just heard. This is completely different from the sexual act carried out between two people with love and respect for each other. That, my friends, is intimacy. We need to stop confusing or mixing up rape with sexual intimacy in marriage. So the concept of Trinity, of the Trinity in Christianity, is a perfect illustration of the relationship where the parties are equal, but one of them is still the head, right? So God has made provision for our salvation by offering us to accept his son Jesus' sacrifice, and that way to atone for our sins. But even though he is God, he forces no one to accept his gift, as amazing and beneficial as it is for our lives. None of us is forced to consent. We are not forced to receive salvation. Freedom of choice was given by God to mankind in the Garden of Eden. It was not and has never been taken away by any man, and certainly not by one man putting a ring on the finger of another. My time is up, so I could go. I have another minute? Okay. So the other point, so that was the point that I wanted to make about consent. I wanted to illustrate the issue of consent. And the other issue that I want to illustrate is that of justice. Hebrews 13:3, remember those who are being mistreated as if you felt their pain in your own bodies. Can we have some consideration for women who are being mistreated, please? Jeremiah 7:5, I will be merciful only if you stop your evil thoughts and deeds and start treating each other with justice. Hosea chapter 2, verse 19, I will make you, this is God talking to the church, I will make you my wife forever, showing you righteousness and justice, unfailing love and compassion. Amos 5:15, hate evil and love what is good. Turn your courts into true halls of justice. I have two things left I want to say. I didn't say it earlier because I was afraid I was going to get run off the stage. But consent is such an integral part of the law. We talk about the Christian nation. We like to talk about the preamble and that we are a Christian nation. We are a Christian nation governed by the rule of law. There is, and minister here is a lawyer. There's no law, there's no obligation or right or anything that you can have in the law that isn't accompanied by consent. If there's no consent, you can't buy property. If someone forces you to do an act, you can't be criminally liable because your will wasn't involved. So consent is key. And the last thing I want to say, rape is a criminal offense for which married women have not been able to have justice. And I read those references from the Bible about justice. It is a fundamental Christian right. And it is high time for us to acknowledge that as a Christian nation, and to extend justice to married women. Thank you.
I am so proud of all of you speakers. You all are just, man, substantive. I mean, okay. I'm getting excited. I don't know about you, but I'm excited, okay? I'm now pleased to call on Mrs. Charlene Paul, who is chair of the Caribbean Women in Leadership, and she's going to speak on women's perspective on the proposed amendment. Mrs. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and I think I will stand on the established protocol as well. Good evening. Women are not a minority to be accommodated. We make up fully 1/2 of the world's population on average, and in the Bahamas, 51%. So let's not go there. The equality of the genders was established from the beginning when the Creator said, "Let us make man in our own image and after our likeness. Male and female created he them, and gave unto them dominion over everything else." Yes, we are physically different, and by and large, softer, gentler, prettier. And we have characteristics that have fashioned us and designed for our childbearing and nurturing. That does not take away from our equality. It is vitally important, I believe, to establish this context, the overarching context in which this conversation should be had. Women are not chattel or property to be owned, bought with a few trinkets and baubles, mansion, or any other monetary item. She was created equal, different, yes, but equal. The same qualities that constitute and makes a man a human being are the same qualities that exist in a woman and makes her a human being, therefore having human rights, will, intellect, and emotion in us all. Dr. Carla Barnett, CARICOM Secretary General, said that the Caribbean must not lose sight of the many issues that stand in the way of women achieving equality, such as women's political participation, unpaid care and domestic work, impact of climate change and gender-based violence, which is a public health crisis in the Caribbean. And when we talk about unpaid care and domestic work, I should just add right here, in the Bahamas, 72% of the households are led, managed by women, single women, carrying the brunt of the burden of care of our children. Global average shows that 1 in 3 women has experienced physical and or sexual violence at some point in their lifetime, usually from a partner. In the Caribbean region, prevalence surveys conducted between 2016 to 2018 show that 5 member states indicate incidence rates as high as 1 in every 2 women. That's what we're dealing with. Sexual intercourse was created and designed by God and given as the act of marriage, the symbol knitting the soul of a man and a woman. It is therefore sacred in its origin and in its intent, so much so that sexual sin, such as fornication, is noted as a sin against one's own body, unlike any other sin. Marriage was established as a covenant between a man and a woman with clear rights and obligations of both parties. And I just love how my forerunner speaker outlined the biblical pattern there. Therefore, to address any issue involving marriage, we must consider the principles upon which marriage was founded. Both parties are called to be subject one to another, first and foremost. This provides for mutual agreement, consent, and respect in everything. So in the context of marriage and marital consent, rights, obligations, and duties, I am reminded of the legal maxim: he who comes to equity must come with clean hands. what that means. The principle here being that if you are relying on the law to protect your rights on one hand, then on the other hand, you yourself must be acting fairly and justly. Oftentimes, there is confusion over the position and role of a married woman and whether she is left defenseless by God and the church to submit to any and every kind of treatment from her husband. I put it to you to the contrary. A married woman, a wife, is in fact protected by God and his word. You see, the husband is called to love his wife as Christ loves the church and gave himself for it. Like the young people would say, be willing to take a bullet for me. Wives, on the other hand, well, let me add, to nourish and to cherish her, even as he does his own body. This is the type of relationship which is to be protected, not just by the law of man, but by the decree of the divine. Therefore, any spouse seeking to exercise their conjugal rights, that is the right to sexual intimacy, must also ensure that they are executing their covenantal obligations. 1 Timothy 1:9 reminds us, knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and for sinners, for unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers, for whoremongers, for them that defile themselves with mankind, for men stealers, for liars, for perjured persons, and if there be any other such thing that is contrary to sound doctrine or teaching. That's who the law is for. In a culture such as ours, where women are being disrespected and violated at endemic levels, I repeat, at endemic levels, with the Bahamas leading the Caribbean in the rape per 100,000 rate in a population. We lead the Caribbean. And the Caribbean, 3 of the Caribbean countries are in the top 10 rape rate around the world. We have a massive problem. This problem affects our children, our homes, our communities, our health care, our welfare care, all of our lives, the whole public. So it's not just a private matter in your house. No, it's affecting all of us. So we can no longer turn a blind eye to violence against women in any form and in any place where it may exist. Any violation of sexual intimacy must be condemned in the strongest means possible, and we must do all that is in our power to protect the weak, the vulnerable, and the oppressed. I am reminded of the mantra, the mandate by which we in CIVIL have been guided for the past 2 years, to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Thank you.
I'm not saying anything. I'm just letting the ship roll on, you know. Dr. Anthony Hamilton, who's the president of Civil Society, is now going to speak to us on attitudes of NGOs towards the proposed amendment. Dr. Hamilton.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Protocol having been established, I shall abide. Attitude of NGOs toward the amendments. It is a distinct pleasure for me to be a panelist here this evening to participate in the discussion on the proposed amendments to the Sexual Offenses Act 1991. Firstly, as a disclaimer, I take this opportunity to advise that I am not aware that the civil society sector specific has been widely consulted for an agreed civil society sector position statement. On the proposed amendments to the Sexual Offenses Act 1991, however, this event and discussion tonight, like others, presents an opportunity for each citizen and resident of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to make strategic representation to the same. 49 years later, as the citizenry and residents of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas makes progress towards celebrating our 50th anniversary, the civil society sector acknowledges that people, that is, women, girls, men, and boys, are the most important assets and investments of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Further, we of the civil society sector also acknowledge that hurt people hurt people. Attitude of NGOs towards the amendments. It is recognized that within the civil society sector, we employ autonomy, and we've had representation from CIVIL this evening, and there are many others that will be in the room with regard to the civil society sector. I want to emphasize here that Civil Society Bahamas, as the apex body for civil society organizations for the Commonwealth of Bahamas, through the Memorandum of Association, section number 4, subsection C, states as follows, and I quote, "Civil Society Bahamas searches for and identifies at any given time the myriad of problems that confront our society, either on its own volition or through the public at large, and search for solutions to these problems. The solutions are derived after proper education and feedback from society through radio programs, television programs, town meetings, the internet, and any other appropriate public forums. The above is inclusive of legislation and policy matters. Further, it is time for the national accountability of protection, adequate provisions, and preparation for each of us as citizens and residents of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas as it relates to sexual offenses. I say this in the context that we would be aware of NGOs such as FOAM, NGOs such as the Brotherhood. These are entities with the challenges that we've had along the sexual line, among other things, because it's a multiplicity of things that we're addressing, in the sense that one leads to the other. And so what we're saying, there needs to be a holistic, practical, and relevant approach to sexual offenses. We have to take into consideration the fact that, speaking to the fact that people are the most important assets and investments, we need to consider the full spectrum of this, dovetailing into the marriage context, and we've heard very well represented this evening from a biblical perspective. And thinking about it traditionally with regard to our society, those value systems that we hold there in our society, and I would hastily walk towards our preamble, again in the context of our 50th anniversary, 49 years later, and giving consideration to those spiritual values, those Christian values, and the rule of law. In conclusion, our joint participation this evening is strategically reflective of a healthy civil society sector in action, as the tripart inclusion and consultation of women and men, which is people, businesses, the business community, and government with regard to governance, as citizenry and residents are engaged in quality national discussions to encourage both individuals and collective communities to choose to take responsibility, specific community responsibilities, very seriously. Therefore, this setting actually facilitates the opportunity for engagement, which is absolutely necessary, that we have the good cross-section of persons making representation and encouraging that environment and atmosphere for that to happen. So then, as has been mentioned earlier with regard to when decisions are actually taken, the decisions taken are embodying the very essence of the very people that we're making representation on behalf of. Because the reality is, when our decisions are taken from a national perspective, it's always to be in the best interests of the citizenry and residents of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And that's specific with regard to our context, our environment, because we recognize that what bears heavily on our decisions in most instances is the fact that our relationships with regard to treaties and conventions, but we need to drill in home and make sure that everybody has an opportunity to make their representation in the context of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, so that we fulfill the responsibility of recognizing that people, women, girls, men and boys, are the most important assets and investments of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. In our democracy, His Majesty, I'm talking about our democracy, I'm not talking about whether you like it or not. In our democracy, His Majesty has his government and he has his loyal opposition. And that interplay creates a competition that's supposed to drive ideas, accountability, and transparency in respect of the governance process. And so tonight, we are going to hear from His Majesty's opposition and from His Majesty's government on this issue of marital rape. And so I'm going to call upon now Senator, the Honorable Maxine Seymour. You have a good name because my mummy's a Seymour. And she's going to give His Majesty's opposition's perspective on the proposed amendment. Senator Seymour.
Minister Raming, Mrs. Davis, moderator, fellow panelists, especially Dr. Bethel, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me here. And I have to say at the outset that His Majesty's loyal opposition does not have an official position on marital rape at this time. What we have been doing is being very intentional about canvassing our caucus and the wider membership of the party in order to really, first of all, educate them on the amendment, well, on the, the bill, and get back from them what their position is on it. Now, I must say that of those discussions that we've had, and we've had quite a number of discussions, so far it's been overwhelmingly agreed that non-consensual sex, whether it's in or out of marriage, should be criminalized. But we do not have an official position at this time. We've gotten a lot of good feedback as well, because we've also consulted with persons from the religious community who, are affiliated with us in terms of the opposition. Our leader of the opposition, the Honorable Michael C. Pintard, has said on more than one occasion that basically having sex with anyone without their consent ought to be criminalized. And members of the parliamentary caucus as well have come out and been very vocal about it. I myself have spoken out about it, and Senator the Honorable Michaela Barnett Ellis, for example, has really been, advocating for the bill, not just to be drafted, but of course to be tabled in the House of Assembly. And because it's, changing as you draft these things, you get amendments, and I think a new amendment just came out. This is a challenge with even having discussions in terms of the party, because there may be tweaks to it. And so the sooner it's tabled, it would be better suited for that kind of consultative process that even as a party that we are engaged in at the moment. For me personally, and now I'm not speaking necessarily for the opposition, but as a member of the opposition, the reality is that we need to make sure that all of our citizens in this country are equally protected in law. And right now, married women do not have the same protections that unmarried women have, and that's completely unacceptable. Any form of inequality or inequity among citizenry in any country is completely unacceptable. And this is one of those things that need to be addressed in order for our citizens to be equally protected, in order for women to be equally protected, whether they are married or whether they are not married. And the reality is that, as we've heard from previous panelists, marriage in no way negates the requirement for consent. Now, I have to say that as a married woman in the Bahamas, which we know that we're a very conservative Christian society, the reality is that it's difficult, and I do understand the cognitive dissonance that is taking place within our society, because marriage is a sacred covenant that we entered into. And the reality is that there are great husbands out there who love their wives as Christ loved the church, and who would give himself for her, and who treat their better half with respect. And this is not what this conversation is about. This conversation is not inclusive of those husbands. But I do understand, like I said, the cognitive dissonance that takes place, because marriage is a very, well, weddings themselves, they're a happy occasion. You know, we used to throw rice at people. Everybody comes out. We wear our best. We buy them gifts. We wish them well. And we expect them to live happily ever after, because that is what we were taught from we were children, you know, in the literature that I'm sure Dr. Bethel may know better of. But the reality is that we have been conditioned that after marriage comes the happily ever after. So when we take words like marriage, or a form of the word marriage, marital, and we pair it with the rape, surely it has to be an oxymoron. And so, like I say, I do understand the challenges that we're having in terms of societal acceptance of this. But we must separate in our thoughts the good husbands from the husbands who are not so good. Because the reality is that many women live with monsters, and they're not living happily ever after, not at all. That's not what their reality is. And sex, which is what is described in Scripture as needing to be on the man in marriage and, you know, whenever I feel like it, etc. Sex is not what rape is. Sex and rape are two different things. They're two completely different things. Rape is forced. It's taking, you know, somebody's body and consuming it with you know, overpowering them, you know, against their will, against their consent, for your benefit. Sex is something that should be mutually beneficial. And that's not what rape is. In rape, the offender is really looking out for him or her, which is debatable depending on which country you're in, as we've heard, looking out for themselves. And so any kind of non-consensual or forced activity in the marital bed, then in my mind, it no longer is a marital bed, and it's really not what God intended. And I am not here as a theologian, so I'm just saying what I, as a wife and as a Christian, how I see it. And so, again, you know, I do understand the cognitive dissonance, but we must do all that we can to advance this bill and to really get it into law, and to make sure that our married women are protected in this country, because there's no way that if somebody forces themselves on you, is violent, and, I mean, robs you of your humanity, your dignity, and all that you have, but they just happen to be your husband, that should be okay. That should not be okay. That is not okay. Because if the same act is happening right next door in your duplex, but that's a boyfriend, then he can be charged. You know, but for the wife, the same act, and we've heard it, like whether it's like in law, whether it's with an object, whether it's with, you know, himself and his own anatomy, whether it's whatever he decides. He could beat you up, slap you up, do whatever, and say, this is mine, I want it now, I'm going to take it forcibly. But you have no recourse. That's completely unacceptable for women in our country. And, you know, recently we celebrated International Women's Day, and we talked about embracing equity. We have to make sure that we have equality and equity in our country. And so we have to continue the discussions. We have to educate people. We have to understand both perspectives, because I really do. I honestly do understand it from both sides. But like I said, the good husbands, the ones who provide, the ones who are there, the ones who would never do anything to hurt their wives, those are not the husbands that we're talking about here. We're talking about the monsters, the people who don't care. They don't respect their wives. They don't respect themselves. They don't respect anyone. And they do what they have to do, and they take it, and women have to, and you have to put yourself in the position of the victim, AKA wife, because people go through a lot. I've heard some unimaginable stories. Unimaginable stories. And it's one thing to go through something and to know that maybe you'll get some justice. You know, it'll still never be the same. It's hard to ever be whole again and to really heal emotionally and spiritually and physically and otherwise. But at least you get some justice when the person is hauled before the court. Hopefully, the judge gives them a tough sentence and all of that. And at least a part of you feels a little bit that, okay, I mattered enough to somebody. But for wives who have to face this violence, this violent act, who are defiled in every way, they currently have no justice in our law. And so we have to advance this discussion. We have to make a difference. We have to really take away the emotions and not deal with this emotively or otherwise, but really look at this sensibly. And the final thing that I'd like to say is that, people talk about, what about persons who, bring charges, false charges, etc. Okay? The reality is that we have to protect those who need protection. What if people accuse people wrongly of murder, of stealing? There's so many, that doesn't mean we cannot make the law. Like, the law has to be there. Somebody could say somebody stole from them, and it's not true. It does that mean that stealing should not be against the law? So we have to protect married and unmarried women equally in our country. Thank you.
So I'm just asking. Suppose life, physiologically speaking, was reversed, and women were stronger than men. Do you think we'd be here? I'm just asking. I'm just asking. Just asking. So we've heard from His Majesty's loyal opposition, and now we're going to hear from His Majesty's government, at least perspectives from His Majesty's government. So I'm going to call now on Mrs. Robin Lines, attorney, to do so. Please.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I am so happy to be here, and I thank you so much to the organizers of this event, this forum, for the invitation. Now, I just want to make one disclaimer. I'm here to give the attorney's perspective. They have the government there? That's okay. And I want to say good evening and stand on the protocol that has already been established and honor and celebrate all of the respective persons in the room. But I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our minister, Lisa Ramming, in the room, First Lady Davis in the room, Maxine Seymour, our senator, in the room. And now I'm going to get in trouble because even my chair of Sewell is in the room. Registrar Misowich is in the room. Everybody in the room. Everyone in the room. It was 1990. The case was R versus R. And the House of Lords had to make a determination on a case that had been brought to them on appeal. And the facts were this. A married couple was separated. The wife was in the house, and she was asleep. And her husband came through her bedroom window in the cover of night, and he beat her, and he forced himself on her in the most violent of ways. And his defense counsel offered in his defense the protection afforded to him under the common law, that marriage was a contractual agreement between those two people, that you cannot rape your wife because your wife gives you consent as you give her consent to have sexual intercourse with you at will upon marriage. And I want to, if I can, tell you what the Lord Lane said in his judgment. And he said, the idea that a wife by marriage consents in advance to her husband having sexual intercourse with her, whatever her state of health or however proper her objection, is no longer acceptable. He went on to say it can never have been other than a fiction, and a fiction is a poor basis for the common law. It seemed to us that where the common law rule no longer even remotely represents what is the true position of a wife in present-day society, the duty of the court is to take steps to alter the rule if it can legitimately do so in light of relevant parliamentary enactment. We take the view that the time has arrived when the law should declare that a rapist remains a rapist, subject to the criminal law, irrespective of his relationship to the victim. That was pronounced in the UK. And that was done because, as in our country, the law was slow to act and slow to respond. In a society like ours, where everything has to be a conversation, and even after the conversation, it leads into a conversation that's going to be followed by a conversation, coupled with a conversation, and after that, you must have a conversation. We talk a lot. And so because we talk a lot, and everyone is entitled to his or her views, the law is slow. Because we are a politically polarized country, and when you enact laws, people catch feelings. The law is slow, and policy is slow. And I didn't come to offer a personal opinion, because I think that is where the country is stuck. It is stuck in this collection of personal opinions. And so I don't want to add to that discussion or that discourse. What I want to say, though, is this. A spouse who is forced to have sex with another spouse, there are provisions in the law, in Section 15 of the Sexual Offenses Act. Let me take you there real quickly. I just want to share it so you know, because a lot of times when we're having this discussion, it begins on the premise as if there's no protection afforded to a wife. And that's not entirely correct. So Section 15 of the Sexual Offenses Act says, any person who has sexual intercourse with his spouse without the consent of the spouse, and then it gives certain criteria, and it says, where there is in existence in relation to them a decree nisi for divorce, a decree of judicial separation, a separation agreement, or an order of a court for the person not to molest or cohabit. In our jurisdiction, it could be a domestic violence protection order, okay? And I think the final one was where the person has notice that a petition for judicial separation or divorce has even been filed. It says that he is guilty of the offense of sexual assault by a spouse and liable to imprisonment for a term of 15 years. So this particular portion of legislation doesn't say for a term up to. It says for a term of 15 years, and Registrar Mishevis can tell you when it's stated like that, it's almost a strict liability offense, in that if you are convicted, it does not leave room for much discretion of the judge in sentence reduction. So there is protection for spouse under those terms and where those circumstances arise. But we have a different issue, I think. And I think the issue that we have is that in these collections of conversations, we're also caught up on words. Caught up on words to the detriment of our women, to the detriment of our sisters, of our mothers, of our wives. Because we can win, and the law is amended, and it takes out those words, who is not his spouse. Just delete it. And all of a sudden, in a day, rape no longer excludes a wife. And then where are we? How much closer are we to justice? Because the truth of the matter is, in jurisdictions where marital rape is legal, its prosecution is almost non-existent. In jurisdictions where marital rape is the law, very few people are even charged. And so I want to add this question. After rape, then what? Because that woman needs a safe space. And if we call it rape or anything else, as a country, we don't have a place that she can go. And that needs to be our focus. I ask you, after rape, then what? Because depending on the police station she goes to, the response she gets is going to be different. If she meets an officer with an opinion that he doesn't engage himself or intervene in marital affairs, she's sent home. So after rape, then what? Have we sensitized our police officers? Have we centralized our response as a government, as a people, as a community, in the hospital where she'll be examined, in the police station where she'll be questioned and interviewed, in the judicial system where she'll be asked to give testimony? After rape, then what? There's a system she has to walk through. There's a process she has to go through. And because we are so caught up on it being called something for the win, then we're not really understanding the fact that she doesn't want to come through this system anyway. After rape, then what? And I am of the school of thought that I would prefer, notwithstanding what it's called, and we can debate as much as we want, I'm on neither side but hers. And the only thing I want to know is that the offense against her is not repeated because she is subject to a system that does not understand her plight. That it is more than just charging him. It is supporting her. It is understanding her and the needs that she has that come along with her. Perhaps her children, perhaps her joblessness, perhaps her brokenness, perhaps her bruised self-esteem, perhaps her mental health. After rape, then what? And all of our energies need to be focused on a response that is cohesive, coherent, and complete for her mind, for her body, for her spirit. If he raped her, if he sexually abused her, molested her, I don't really mind what you call it. All I want to know is she can walk through a system that doesn't rape her again. I thank you.
Y'all know I go to church a lot, right? Hallelujah. You know, just out of an abundance of caution, I asked the question, what if physiologically the roles were reversed and women were stronger than men? And, they got some men who might think I'm trying to make a point for them. But my suggestion was, if women were stronger than men on average, we wouldn't be here, because women wouldn't let men do to them what happens, because a lot of times rape in marriage and outside of marriage ain't nothing but raw physical force meeting a force that can't resist it. So for that reason, I have one daughter. And so the question was asked, after rape, what? But I was asking the question to myself, before the rape, what? So I told my daughter, find yourself a self-defense class and strengthen your ability to protect yourself, simply because in circumstances you might meet a monster. And if the monster knows that you can protect yourself, well, I don't know. I'm hoping you give yourself a chance to protect yourself. So that was the point of the question. Because I do believe that rape ain't about the sex. It's about the force to be able to have the sex. And it is only that overpowering force that men physically have by nature that compels some of them to do what they do, right? But that was just my 4 cents. You ain't giving me no more about that. So some, but they're the ones who don't get raped from men who ain't stronger than them. That's the point. Because I have one sister, when I was in school, she used to protect me from all kinds of people. And I have a mother whose brothers will tell you she protected them from all kinds of people. And that's what happens, They tell us that even if men and women did the same exercise, exactly the same exercise, physiologically speaking, they cannot achieve on balance the same strength. So that's a physiological difference. And plenty of men know that. And that's why they play crazy. So I just remind all my sisters, friends, that she got 4 brothers, 5 brothers. I just remind them, so they know we are here. We are here, right? Okay, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so question and answers. Remember, the rule is, if you get agitated, you have to say brother, sister before you say what you say to somebody. And secondly, please, keep the statements to a minimum and the questions to a maximum so that we can get the fullest participation and hear from our panelists and the like about what it is. And so I now open the floor for questions. And that mic over there is the mic that we want you to go to, because we want to feed it into the audio for the media. Okay? So, yes, sir.
Well, first of all, I would like to acknowledge the Department of Gender and Family Affairs, long needed in the country as an advocate. And so please give the department a hand, please. Very good job. Important advocates are essential today because of the violations that institutions perpetuate on people. And so I start with that because marriage is an institution. And if we don't appreciate that gender can, in and of itself, be a space of safety, but a space of unsafety, because we need to talk about safe spaces for both men and women in this debate. The next point that I'd like to make is simply this. Where is the dysfunction? Is it in the male? Is it in the female as we talk about marital rape issues? Or is it in the pathology of the family? So marital rape is symptomatic of something that we don't want to touch, which is the pathology in the family. Put the DNA on that. Thank you.
Okay. Now, here's what I'm going to suggest. As you ask your, but where do the panelists, let them come up here? Oh, okay, great. Questions? Yes, sir, please, to the mic. Yeah, that mic right there.
I'm honored to be here as I look around the room because I'm a fisherman and very rarely I get this opportunity to be in an environment like this. I was highly pleased with Ms. Robin Lyons on her clarity to me that there was some sort of caveat that a lady had a wife had a recourse for justice. So that cleared that up for me, and I hope that everybody else heard that, I mean, out there in Radio Land or whatever. But aside from that, before, like early on this week, I heard this lecture on empathy. And it's one thing that we have to realize that there are going to be men involved in this.
If I might, I'm going to let you speak, right?
Yes.
But I do want to remind that we do want to have the question.
Very, very quick, yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Empathy. So I want to remind you that there are going to be men victims in this also. So when we're talking about these women, I want you to realize that before the rape is what we really, really should have been looking at. So why don't we have like expedited separations or free divorce? If a lady is being victimized over and over again, why do we allow this to continue and continue? And we're Bahamians, we're mavericks. We can be mavericks. This is the 50th. We can do it.
Okay, is there anyone wants to take on that question? Why don't we have quicker divorces and so forth? No one? Yes, ma'am? Come, they want you to come to.
The first point that comes to mind is you talk about, having a quicker divorce. You have to, I think those of us who are advocating for marital rape, first of all, you want to give the woman a recourse. It's all well and good to say, well, let her get to divorce, but we're talking about persons who are being, they are under duress. They are in a weakened state. I don't know why you're swinging your head around when I said that a woman who is raped is under divorce. Right. So what I'm saying is, okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
When you, as a magistrate, right? And so I am very familiar with the process of what it takes to bring a matter to court, and a person has to make a complaint, and they've got to go through all of that. If someone has forcibly had, by the time you've gone through whatever that relationship is, for you to go to the civil process to file for a divorce or for a legal separation, that's its own mechanism. That doesn't address the physical harm or the threat that the person was under in that moment. Let's think, for example, because we don't have to go all the way to say if she was married for a long period of time, and why did it continue? Only on the first time it happens. Are we saying that it has to have happened a number of times, and therefore when she notices that it is a pattern of behavior, then she's going to go and apply for a divorce? And only then, after she has applied for a divorce, she is able to get redress? I think the question that you have asked, to my mind, still leaves the woman exposed. And that's the difficulty that I have by saying that, well, let her go and apply for a divorce so that she doesn't have to live with the person. But when we don't tell someone, if someone is going to rob or steal from you, that they got to go and buy the bag back first before they could go to the police and make a complaint. So I think there's a difference between the act of the physical harm and the steps that you take to redress it. And I don't think they should be put together as therefore not allowing the person to be able to have redress.
No one else? Okay. Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Jamal Archer. I know I came late, so I'm not sure if this was addressed already. According to the Sexual Offenses Act, the definition of rape is the act of any person not under 14 years of age having sexual intercourse with another person who is not his spouse. My first question is, do we believe that a wife can rape her husband? I'm not sure if that was addressed. When you move further into this definition, they clearly explain that rape is truly the absence of consent. Now, my understanding of consent is to not have permission. Marriage is a very interesting space. If you go further into this definition, you would see that in the absence of consent, that if a spouse was to do certain forms of stimulation without consent, marriage is generally thought of as a safe space where you could initiate some forms of stimulation to get to a certain end point.
One more question.
My question is, what are your thoughts on the absence of consent in a situation that there's some initiation? You didn't get consent, but you're trying to initiate. How do we think about that in the context of marriage?
You all know, if you all look at me, I can answer, right?
So I'm not necessarily going to address the question of consent in marriage per se. I just want to talk about what consent consists of in general. And consent is a moment in which one allows the impermissible normally to happen, right? Now, when we talk about marriage in the Bahamas, we tend to assume that that act of becoming married then gives a kind of blanket consent. We've talked about that in a number of different ways, but that is something that we tend to accept. And I wanted to address the question of pathology, but I don't think you went far enough. I want to talk about the pathology of the entire society. We are in a society which has come out of a lack of consent. So we do not know, I don't think we should assume that we know how to give consent and that we understand what it consists of, because there is so much coercion and consent that is given. If you say yes, but you say yes because otherwise you have no other option, that is legally not considered consent. And that is morally not considered consent. But I want to make the argument that in our society, the pathology that we inhabit, and it's not just us, we heard about the Caribbean, it is the entire world that was created, that was created basically on genocide, where whole groups of people were eradicated from this land in order for people to plant stuff on to make money. The original drug trade, I would call it. People were growing tobacco, sugar, all kinds of good drugs that are still legal today, and done through the absence of consent, through the enslavement of human beings. And I think that as we have this discussion, we talk about coercion, we talk about consent, and so just thinking that a person who has said or implied a yes is in a position to truly give over access to their body is something that we have to question. We cannot have this discussion without also recognizing that we need to question what coerces us in general. If that has to do, somebody asked, why did I put my water bottle up here? And the fact that people didn't necessarily recognize what I was trying to say. is interesting to me. We live in a world where our entire livelihood depends on our always submitting our will to people who come in from the outside. We live in a world where our governments have determined that our economic benefit relies on people coming in from outside to bring money. That creates a coercive environment, and so to even begin to have this discussion, we need to recognize that whole. Okay? And so I just want, that's why I'm not addressing the question of marriage per se, because that is a subsector of the whole in which we live. And I want us to step back a little bit and ask, okay, are we truly working and living as free individual beings in this society and in this world? And then put the place of women in there who are the subset of that.
Yeah.
And married women, even more.
Okay. I just... Yes, I do. Professor?
Sir?
To address you with your rank. I would like for you to expand or add in the discussion the idea of intimacy and our abilities or the cultural mores in our society of doing and being an intimate nation. For me, in particular, as a psychologist for over 20 years in the country, I know we don't do intimacy in any place very well in our society. It seems like we are afraid of being close to each other, either in marriage or out of marriage, or even in organizations. We, as a country, are not a close-knit people, and I don't know if it's the pathology that exists in our families, the pathology that exists in our nation generally, or our inability to do closeness. And that's my 5 cents.
I think there may have been a question mark at the end of that.
Well, however.
I would just say that what you point out, the inability to engage in safe intimacy is, I think, a symptom of the entire history that I've been talking about. It is a protective measure that we take so that we, who have already become vulnerable by our own history, do not make ourselves more vulnerable. And I think that crosses all sides.
Okay, good evening.
This for me again?
No.
No. Good.
If I may briefly respond to the gentleman who was up just a moment ago and asked the question about initiation. I don't see him. Yeah. I think the question that you've raised is a very important one because it brings to the fore the concern I have. Currently, under the law, a husband who initiates with his wife in that way is fully protected. A single person should not, under the current law, take that chance because he can run afoul of the law and commit rape currently. If the definition of rape is changed, that would put married people in that same category as well. That a man, under the changed definition of rape, married man, would have to think twice about initiating any kind of act that would be defined as sexual intercourse with his wife should the definition change. That's my concern.
Sir.
Good evening, everyone. I probably don't have a question, just like to make some comments. Quick, brief, pithy, very pithy. Okay. Okay, so let me begin with this. I'm a happily married man.
Special people. But you,
yeah.
You tell me.
I'm a happily married man. I've been married for approximately 26 years, but I've been with the same woman for 36 years. So I've been with her all of my life. So coming here tonight, it was very informative to me, and it was eye-opening, because someone mentioned a word like cognitive dissonance. You see, a lot of that was taking place here tonight in my head. When I hear the word wife, I think love. When I hear the word husband, I think someone who loves his wife. When I think about marriage, I think love. So when I hear words such as a woman is not a chattel, it causes some confusion. So I can see why Lion says, rape then what? A presenter said, the married man is like the man next door. Rape then what? She also said that, if I could recall.
You see why I don't give you all the rope?
Yeah. but what I'm saying, rape then what? I'm saying, I appreciate the conversation, but again, we have to try to maintain the sanctity of marriage. And I concur with Mr. Morse. We can call it something else, but just rape, marital rape, we could try to see what we can do with that. But something needs to be done.
I have a question. If we call it something else, will the consequences be the same as the thing we don't want to call it? That's my question. Yes, sir.
It can be, depending on the circumstances. I believe that the range of punishment should be from mandatory counseling. In the case of a man, for example, who approaches his wife, touches her, for example, in a way that is defined as sexual intercourse, but she's upset with him and he took his chances, ought not to have done that. Do you want to throw him in jail? I say no. Maybe mandatory counseling for him. But there are some acts of forced sexual intercourse in marriage that merit life in prison. So I think the range should be from mandatory counseling up to life in prison.
So I'm asking the lawyers now who know, because I don't. So as Reverend Moss just said, does the conviction of rape come with ranges of considerations and sentencing?
Well, inherent in the process of range of sentencing, the court would take into consideration the varying circumstances. So that's why when there is a provision for a sentence, that includes in it the possibility that the court would take into account the different factors. So in the example that you gave, where let's say there wasn't that the physical force and violence wasn't at the extent of the other range, then certainly the court would take that into account. And I think the way I think there's a statute. When I last practiced, when I last prosecuted, I didn't look back at what the provisions are now in terms of sentencing, but I think there was a minimum sentence of 7 years for rape. It could go higher, but the minimum was 7. I don't know if, I'm not sure if that has changed. I know that generally speaking, there is a school of thought against mandatory minimums, not only for rape or sexual offenses, but other offenses, because people think that, that ties the court's hands if there are extenuating circumstances or circumstances that differ from other cases. So you could imagine, given the range of interaction that you just discussed, Reverend Moss, if there was a mandatory minimum, then we would think, oh my goodness, but he didn't hit her, let's say. He didn't hit her, so should the person who didn't hit the woman get the same sentence as a person who had intercourse with his wife without consent, but, beat her for 15 minutes? So, yeah, there is certainly scope for the court's discretion, and that's why there is, the law normally makes a provision for there to be a range.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, everybody. I did get a chance to hear Pastor Cedric Moss' presentation, and just let me say I adopt his presentation in the context of finding the medium. I do think for the panelists, part of the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is our objective? What is it that we seek to achieve? And I think when you listen to Senator Lawrence along with all of the other persons, you do get the sense that we want to have an end game somewhere. So if the goal is to address the issue as it relates to the abuses within the relationship, I do think the question is whether there's a legal framework already established by way of Section 15 that lends itself to that. Because I do think it's important, Minister Lang, for us to look at this moment in the same way probably King Solomon would have looked at it. How do you not split the baby? Because if we believe fundamentally that at the core of marriage is this common thread of consent, all of us know, whether we buy a cheap or expensive jacket, if you pull a thread that is loose from that space, you run the risk of ruining the entire jacket. I believe we have an opportunity to, on the one hand, resolve the abuses within the context of relationship, and at the same time maintain the thing that is fundamental to that of marriage, and that is the question of consent. So I'm just wondering from the panelist point of view, if they've taken into account all of the other dynamics as it relates to the question of insisted that the question of consent be included in the process.
Thank you, thank you. I think, Madam Lyons, you may want to, because I'm hearing some readings of what you said about Section 15 that might be more liberal than you said, because you were very clear that there are circumstances and that there are protections. Yes. Okay. Right? Yeah.
May I just say this, just in response to, may I just say, if she can also expand on the fact that because you already have the framework in Section 15, if that can include the other things that was mentioned here in terms of what it concerns her.
Yeah.
In other words, you know, you mentioned.
Well, let me, because what I did was I quoted, like I said, I offer no personal opinion, but I quoted Section 15 because a lot of people don't know about that provision, because the conversation focuses on the definition of rape in accordance with Section 3. And so I wanted to make reference to Section 15. Now, the thing about the law is that it's not entrenched to the point that it cannot be changed. Acts are repealed in their entirety. Acts are amended. We're talking tonight about proposed amendments. So Section 15 has these conditions that apply for where sexual abuse of a spouse is applicable, and I read those circumstances. A decree nisi, which means that there has been a filing for a divorce and the grounds for that divorce have been heard, and the court has made a determination to dissolve the marriage, right? But that dissolution of marriage has not yet been made absolute, okay? And so that is what that means in circumstances where decree nisi has been pronounced, where there is a judicial separation, because under the Matrimonial Causes Act summary jurisdiction, you can go to the court and get a legal separation. Now, in our jurisdiction, as a matter of culture, separation simply means you live here and I live over there. But that's not a legal separation. Man and wife are legally required to cohabit. That's why cohabitation is actually used as a ground to determine a fraudulent marriage, because you're not really seen to be really married if husband live one way and you live the other. So there are all these nuances and dynamics I don't want to get you confused with. I wasn't using Section 15 for anything other than your information. But it can certainly be amended to remove or to simply add. To simply say, and in the reading of that section, where it says, any person who has sexual intercourse with his spouse without the consent of the spouse, where there is an existence in relation to them, and it talks about all these things, it has to be an existence in relation to them, could simply move that. And all of those caveats don't necessarily have to be applicable.
But in all those conditions,
Yes.
there is this circumstance of separation or something of that nature.
And I think that is the challenge to,
Right.
to,
Exactly.
yes, yes, yes.
And that's why I wanted the clarification, because there are these other circumstances where two people are married, where this act is happening, where there is no coverage.
Yeah.
Not in the law.
All I'm saying is,
I got you. I'm just.
Yeah, those instances would not apply to Section 15. They may apply to other provisions of the law, where there is an assault, where there is abuse. They may apply under the provisions of the Domestic Violence Protection Orders Act, right? But not to sexual abuse of a spouse, because those things are very specific in their context. But that's why I'm saying, you know, for me, well, I just say I ain't gonna offer no opinion. Who want to answer the question? I hope that provided some clarity on the legislation itself. You didn't get it? We can talk after.
Good evening to First Lady Davis and to all distinguished guests. Robin Lines, former Minister Shivago Lang. I'm of the view that a woman has a right. Everybody has a right. And I have to repeat this, Section 15, again. The law curtails everything for the protection of its citizens. Whether it be on the outside of Section 15, you have provisions that cover yourselves to be protected as citizens. And I'm saying, back to my first statement, I'm of the view. Are we under, when I say we, the marriage, the term or the word marriage is under attack? Is it? Is it a sexist view?
Okay, let me do this. I'm not going to stop you, but what I want to do is we are already at what is supposed to be the end of this time. I want to ask you to ask your question, please. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. Yeah.
So when it comes to us making our decisions, all right, I listen to the registrar attentively. We can speed or fast track cases. Why are cases being delayed in terms of married women whose rights were being abused? Okay? Why should the case set up in the court when I know for a fact that we have cases that were fast tracked? That's one point. And that's a question, why the case is being...
You get one, so that's it.
Right. Okay, put on the shelf.
That's you get your one. Thank you much.
Okay.
No answers? No? Ma'am, please. Please.
The prosecution has the
Just give it your answer.
you had mentioned the registrar and you'd asked a question. Did you want my answer, or that was just a statement? Okay. The prosecution has the control over which cases it brings forward to the court. The court is obligated, it sits and is available 5 days a week to hear the cases. The court doesn't fast-track cases. It's the prosecution that makes the determination in whatever situation, whatever circumstance, whatever is the nature of the offense. The prosecution makes that determination. So as a former magistrate and registrar, I don't have any control over who brings the cases to me and when they bring them to me. The police make up their dockets and they present it. In the Supreme Court, the litigants or the attorneys, they push for when they want their cases heard and how they want it heard. So that's the only answer I can give you. You're asking about, of the why aren't certain cases fast-tracked? That's a question for the prosecution.
Yes, ma'am.
I I just think we should not allow that question to go unanswered as well in terms of, is marriage under attack? And absolutely, marriage is under attack, but it's not what the attacker that we're looking at. We have to step back. You know, this law and the courts and everything is only trying to deal with what already exists. The attack already has taken place when persons within a marriage are not conducting themselves according to how marriage was intended to be conducted. So we're under attack, and it begins at a whole spiritual realm of attack, and we need to deal with how we are training, teaching our men, our women, and how we respect and love one another. So it goes a whole lot further than just the law. I thought I'd say that.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Anisa Abdullah. So it's interesting. This conversation is really about bodily autonomy of women. So far, we've just had men speak at this podium. So it's not the podium, at the mic. And then it's also the right to live a life free from violence. And I think with that premise, we can all agree. And so Senator Lyons asked, what after rape? Equal protection before the law. We remove rape, it's equal protection before the law. That is what is required. And I think that's what everyone, or this is why we're having this debate. The question I have has to do with moral courage from the political standpoint. We know it's wrong. We're hearing from everyone here collectively, without regard for political affiliation, that everyone agrees that it is wrong to violate another human being in this way. So what role does political or moral courage have to play in this?
You know, y'all don't get mad at me, okay? We are debating the Sexual Offenses Act of 1991. Do you know that in that act, prior to that act, boogery was a crime in the Bahamas? Y'all know that, right? All right? Okay, and incest was not. Do y'all know that in changing that fact of boogery and incest, boogery in particular, that it was done by joint consent of the two parties in Parliament and quietly because they felt compelled that it ought to have been done? So the question of political will was being raised. So I say to you, that was done in 1991, quietly, by agreement. And the society at large had no idea it was done. But today, you have this stark issue on which consensus is there. And we, even if quietly, cannot have our parties agree to get this done. Whether we consult and have language that is acceptable or not, I think all of that is room for discussion. And at the end of the day, what these people want, women and men who may be subject to this, is equal treatment under the law. So one way to do that is you either amend the law to give women and spouses in marriage that right, or amend the law to take the right from everybody. But we don't do that. We don't take rights. So I'm just saying we have a historical precedent for doing things in the law, even quietly, because we feel compelled to do so.
Okay, so we spoke a lot tonight about the law. However, there's also a social aspect that goes along with this. And so my question is, if the law is changed, do we expect that to change the social issues as well? Because a lot of women, they may not recognize or understand that they are being raped or abused or in a bad situation, and there's a lot of societal pressure, whether it may be from the church or their family, to not say anything or do anything about it. So if the law is changed, or in progression of trying to get that law changed, what do we do socially to get people to understand that this is something that you can use, this is a tool that's for you now? That's it.
Good evening, all, and happy Women's Month to all the lovely ladies in the building. My question, what are the health considerations being factored into this discussion as far as, I guess, the penalizing matters that arise in marital rape, for example, STIs, AIDS, HIV, things like that, that come out of marital rape and the violent act perpetrated. I don't think I heard anyone address it thoroughly. I may have come in late, but can someone speak to that, please? Because how can we have this discussion and that not be embedded into that policy? Thank you.
And that will be the last question. Thank you.
In my presentation, I mentioned that gender-based violence, in fact, is one of the largest healthcare concern and crisis in the country. And countries such as Jamaica has in fact quantified the cost of such violence. And for them, it was over $1 billion. The healthcare concern, and if we talk to our healthcare workers, we would know that the women presenting to the hospital for cases of violence, GBV, etc., is huge. And the cost of women not being able to go to work, having to take days off until they heal, and it's huge. And so we have not quantified it in the Bahamas, but if Jamaica is in the state that it is, and Jamaica actually rape rate is half per capita of the Bahamas, then we know that ours is really up there in millions and probably hundreds of millions of dollars. So, well, those are the type of things that women groups like ours are advocating for, because absolutely they should be made to pay, And so right now we really just look at punishment, but we really do not look at retribution in any form. And to the lady who talked about, the education aspect of it, that's why we have to keep doing what we do. We have to keep educating and raising the awareness, because there are a lot of women who simply do not know, and they feel as if they're struggling alone and their cries are falling on, deaf ears. And that's why we have to continue to speak up for those who cannot speak. So here is the thing, though. Here is the thing. Every time we have a conversation on the women issues in our nation, despite the disparity, the huge disparity of the statistics that indicate how women are suffering in this country, we always get that pushback. What about the men? Men are the ones by and large who are creating a lot of our challenges. And we're not saying that there are not issues that need to be addressed for men in their right place. What we are saying that women issues in our nation are huge and is having a very significant impact on our family life, our children, our resources, and it needs to be fixed now.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is, yes, it was Attorney Lyons who said, what we have is this pool of opinions about life that we are drowning in. That was so profound for me. really was so profound. We also have a pool of incapacity to just stand down as we dialogue about some things. Stand down, right? So let me offer something as opposed to the jazz. Let me offer something opposed to the jazz. Let me offer this. I didn't say you were Jerry. I just said let me offer something close, which is Jesus once said, you know, you ought to have done the one and not leave the other undone. Can we not do both? Because we're brilliant enough to do that? Are we not able to do the men, undo the men and the women so that we achieve the end for which we are seeking to pursue, right? I mean, we can do the both. And we can talk about the disproportionate realities that confront women. And marital rape is a disproportionate reality for women. Violence, in some respects, is a disproportionate reality. We could say that and acknowledge that there may be that marginal reality for men as well, because at the end of the day, both matter. Both matter, even if the impact is broader for some. You know, my son is 14 years old, and he's the last one I got to raise. And I am raising him in a different environment than all of his other siblings are being raised. So I'm trying to raise him with a certain degree of tenderness so that when he leaves me, and this is what he does. I didn't ask him to do this. He'll stop me and come back to the car, ask me to roll the window down. He said, Daddy, I love you. And I dare not, he can be soft, and I hope he's a lot softer than you, because he'll be a better man if he's softer than you are. Okay, and I'll tell you why. My brother. The reason being is I learned for myself that the realities of my machoism is not a reality that sustains good relationships. That a warmer person, like the Christ I serve, I say, is a person that is capable of sustaining a better relationship. Right? And that has nothing to do with being soft. That has something to do with being warm. Not cold. Not harsh. It's able to empathize with other people's plight. So, women have to empathize with the plight of men, and men have to empathize with the plight of women. Because until we see each other, we will see no one. And if we see no one, we will fix no one. And we will not correct the problems we have. Right? And so I think this is a great opportunity. It was a great opportunity. I think the dialogue was excellent. The presentations were excellent. The thoughts were excellent. And whether we agreed or disagree, I think it gave us an opportunity to learn some things. I did. And I am so proud of all of you who presented tonight. I'm telling you, really, really proud. But it is not my task, to give you the vote of thanks. I'm going to call on Ms. Melvin Simonet right now from the Department of Gender and Family Affairs to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the leadership, faculty, and staff at the university, the leadership and staff at the Department of Gender and Family of the Ministry of Social Services and Urban Development, including the staff at the Department of Gender and Family Affairs, I wish to extend sincerest thanks to all of you for attending this evening's forum. Special thanks to the Honorable Lisa Raming, Minister of State in the Ministry of Social Services, to Mrs. Anne-Marie Davis, spouse of our Prime Minister. It's a pleasure to have you here this evening. To our illustrious moderator, MC, Mr. Shivago Lang. To you, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to the other program participants, to our panelists. Excellent. I join Mr. Lang in commending our panelists this afternoon. I'd just like to call their names again. Dr. Nicolette Bethel, Pastor Cedric Morse, Mrs. Carol, and I'll say Munnings, Misovich, to Mrs. Charlene Paul, Dr. Anthony Hamilton, Senator the Honorable Maxine Seymour, and Ms. Robin Lines. To all of you this afternoon, excellent, excellent presentations. We could not thank you enough. So thank you very much for sharing. Thank you, audience, for your participation. Thank you, those who are watching online. The event is being live streamed. To our media team, thanks to each one of you. May God bless you. And I extend best wishes for the rest of the evening to be enjoyable. Again, thank you. Photo? Okay, we'd like to do a photo so we can have our presenters just